Tansei, good morning. My name's Emerald UnRuh. I'm a student at Simon Fraser University. I study Indigenous Studies and Political Science. I'm Métis. My family names are Belumere, Fleury, and Desjardins. We come from communities in the Red River Settlement, Fort Ellis, St. Madeleine, La Pas, St. Lazare, and Rocanville. We are guests on the shared unceded traditional territories of the Kakite, Coquitlam, Kwantlen, and Katzie First Nations. We've been guests on this shared unceded territory for 3 generations now. I'm excited to be here today to share my family's story of resilience, my experience, and hopefully increase understanding of who we are as Métis people. As Indigenous people, we all wrestle with big questions and big ideas surrounding indigeneity. For Métis people, this can often be more difficult. It's often difficult for Métis to tackle the big questions, like who are we? Where do we come from? How did we get here? What does being Métis mean to me? That task is made even harder when our history is made so invisible. We're not taught very well about who the Métis are in school. The stories that they tell us about who our people are different. They don't match the ones that I've been told in my home. When I visit a museum, and I'm excited to see the Indigenous exhibits, I never see things that look like my great-uncle's beaded jacket or my great-grandma's pipe. My identity is often up for debate. Complete strangers will question me point blank. Why am I Métis? What does that mean? What percentage am I? What's my blood quantum? As if this is a really good indicator for them of how authentic I am. Our history is complicated and hard to understand. It's been a 400-year-long struggle of not belonging in either world, of trying to walk in 2 worlds at once. And these misunderstandings have dire consequences. When people don't understand who we are, the well-being of my people is always in jeopardy. It's always a debate. Which of course raises the question, who are we? Who do we think we are? When people ask us, they're often confused. And my first question is, where are they getting their information about us? The Supreme Court of Canada defines Métis people as someone as having a historic connection to the Red River settlement, as someone who self-identifies as Métis, and as someone who's accepted by a modern Métis community. But for me, my identity is very personal. It comes down to the stories that I've been told growing up, the people that I'm connected to, the places that I come from, and how I honor these connections in my day-to-day life. And I'm very, very lucky. I'm one of the fortunate ones. I have a beautiful family history, and I know what it is. These stories have been passed down by the matriarchs, the strong women in my family, around my mom's kitchen table. And even though these stories are so incredible, they're not uncommon stories. You talk to any Métis person, and the stories that I'm about to share with you today will line up almost perfectly with the ones that they have in their families. When you follow the arc of these stories, it shows a distinctly Métis experience that my family has been present at and impacted by almost all of the major events that have happened to my people over the last 400 years. And these same problems, these same values, these same solutions that have been in existence for 400 years are still very real today. They may look or sound a little different, but at the root of the matter, they are the same. And they tell us who we are, where we've been, where we're going. These stories are really the backbone of our community. I'd like to start off by talking about my great-great-grandma, Marguerite. Marguerite Belumere was the sister-in-law of Louis Riel. She was married to Patrice Belumere, Louis's right-hand man. Now Louis, Uncle Louis, he's a topic for a whole other TED Talk. That's a very long and proud history, and I'm very, very lucky to be so closely connected to it. We grew up hearing these stories about him all the time, sitting around my grandma's kitchen table, and she was so, so proud to share them. One of my favorites was how when he tore his moccasins, my great-grandma made him a new pair, a beautiful beaded pair. Other times we'd pull the bright red biography book off of the bookshelf and it would just fall open to the dog-eared pages where the names were highlighted and circled a million times over and tell the same stories. I feel so, so lucky to have that connection and to have been told those stories. It was really surprising when I was in my 10th grade social studies class. And my Uncle Louis Riel was called a traitor, a heretic, a murderer. No one said anything different about him in that class. No one questioned this description of him. It was just kind of accepted as fact, and people just moved on. Next, we have my great-grandma Cecile. She's another really strong woman whose stories we heard often growing up. She lost her husband to TB, and when that happened, she walked across the entire province of Manitoba with young children and a cow to connect with family, where she knew that she could rely on community, kinship, family, to stay alive, to stay safe, to survive the hardships. We're still working hard to understand her connection to the St. Madeleine settlement near Fort Ellis. The St. Madeleine settlement was a Métis settlement near Fort Ellis, and during the 1930s and 40s, the government started a new program to clear land for settlers. My relations were away harvesting Seneca root, and the houses were burned to the ground. The dogs were shot, and the local church was turned into a piggery. When they returned, they had nowhere to go. This is part of the reason the Road Allowance People came into existence. They were a group of Métis people who had nowhere to live, whose land was taken away, and in order to survive, they lived, or squatted, on tax of crowned land. The Road Allowance People were in existence until as late as 2002, the same year my little brother was born. That brings me to my grandma, who we called Mum-Mums. She was a strong woman as well, and I'm very lucky to have had a really close relationship with her growing up. After my great-grandma Cecile remarried, they settled in a farm in Rocanville, where my Mum-Mums grew up. She was the only member of her family to complete high school, and she even went on to become a psych nurse. But the stories my mom and my Auntie Marn shared about my Mum-Mums were stories that she never told us herself. She was kicked off buses for being a squaw, she was excommunicated from the church for marrying a Protestant, and she faced racism that was so incredible that she moved all the way to BC, hoping for better for her daughters. What I find most amazing about my Mum-Mums was even though it was so hard being Métis, she taught me to be proud of who I am, of the stories that she passed down, of the knowledge she shared with me, of all the different things she taught me how to do, like jig, make bannock, make preserves. But the most important lesson she taught me was how to be kind and respectful to all of our relations, that we need to take care of each other, that we need to do everything with love. When I think about what it means to be Métis, all I have to do is think about my Mum-Mums and everything she taught me. And then there's my mom. If my Mum-Mums taught me what it means to be Métis and all the family stories, my mom fought hard to continue that, to find us a community where we would be included and understood, to keep that connection alive. My mom works hard to do this with other kids in the community too. She works hard to make sure that kids who know these hardships too well and too early come out of it stronger on the other side. But her job is made harder by ignorance. She works with a lot of people who don't understand who we are, who don't know where we came from, and at the end of the day, don't think that we're Indigenous. This disconnect leads to the feeling of being a billboard or a target, the need to explain herself day after day in a job she's been in for 10 years. But it's a big gift she gives me and other kids in the community, of remembering who we are, having places where we are understood and accepted. And she gives me the inspiration to fight for people in places that aren't designed for us. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm still figuring out where I fit in. I'm still trying to answer big questions. I still have doubt about my identity, and I'm still working hard to learn and unlearn and relearn all of these different facets of who we are because of the system that we've grown up in, and the fact that this history that I've shared with you has been made largely invisible. One of the biggest lessons I've learned from these stories is that I have a unique role in the community. My job is to figure out who I am and what I'm good at, and how to do it well to serve others. We've always relied on each other, and we continue to rely on each other. All of these stories speak to the main values of who we are. The reciprocity, the kindness, the love, that's who we are. That's what allowed my great-great-grandma Marguerite to fight for our people. That's what allowed my great-grandma Cecile to walk across the province to connect with family who would take care of her and love her for who she was. That's what allowed my Mum-Mums to teach me who I am and to be proud of it despite the hardships. That's what allows my mom to walk beside other youth in unimaginable hardships and come out on the other side stronger. That's what allows me to stand here in front of you today and tell you proudly that I am Métis, and that Métis people are these stories, these people, these places, these values, that this is home, this is community, this is identity. And it's these shared experiences that play a huge role in this, in our survival. Our survival is dependent on this community. It's dependent on all of our relations. The stories that we share, the stories that we've always shared, they keep us together and they keep us connected. And it's shocking and comforting, that recognition. When you run across another Métis, another relation, and you share those stories and you go, oh, that story is the same as mine. Our Cookums lived through the same thing. Our Mushums knew each other. My auntie is your auntie. And it's not uncommon to feel a rush of emotions when you realize that the stranger isn't a stranger, that it's community sitting beside you and standing next to you, and that they're reflecting back to you who you are. And again, it comes down to that this is the survival, the sharing of a simple story. It's comforting and resilience building. It feels like coming home. These stories, culture, community, they're shared widely. And again, they're incredible, but not uncommon. Almost every Métis person I've met has got some kind of story about kitchen parties, jigging, bannock, taking care of each other, showing that reciprocity, that kindness, that love. Because it was hard living, and it is still hard living, and we won't get through it alone. Our survival is dependent on the strength we share as a community. The willingness of our people to reach out and help, to provide support, to pass down these stories, to be brave, strong, and generous. Our community is these intergenerational values of sharing and giving and receiving, of honesty, trust, and faith. Being Métis means showing this reciprocity, kindness, and love in everything that we do. We're known by many names: Métis, Michif, half-breed, Road Allowance People, the Bois-Bru, the half-burnt men, the Flower Beadwork People, the Forgotten People, the Free People, Otipemisiwak, the people who own themselves. And all of these names reflect a chapter of our history and the fact that we are a strong people, that we are a people in charge of ourselves, that we are resilient and we are still here, even though we've been hidden in plain sight for generations, despite the fact that we're the fastest growing Indigenous population in Canada, the world's youngest people. The stories that I've shared and my own experience really reflect back to me that people don't know who we are and where we come from, how we move in the world, and that these stories are incredible but not uncommon. These are not the stories that are being told. And because they're not the stories that are being told, that tells us that recognizing Métis people matters, respecting our culture matters, upholding our rights matter. Telling each other these stories matters, because the well-being of my people depends on knowing who we are and where we come from. My non-Métis relations. I hope that by sharing this with you today, you understand a little bit more about who we are, where we fit, and what we need from you. I hope that you understand that by not seeing, hearing, or understanding us, we're being hurt in the process. And that this is the same process and the same problems and the same barriers that my great-great-grandma faced, and that those problems are still alive and well today, even though they may look a little different. The only way to change this is understanding us better. And so I'd like to challenge you to reevaluate your understanding of who the Métis are and begin to replace the stories that you've been told or taught to believe about us with the stories that we're telling you about who we are, where we come from, what matters to us, where we're going moving forward. That's the best way that you can support the well-being of our people. My Métis relations. I'm really hoping that you're feeling seen and heard and reminded of who you are today, because we're from the same strong people. Your identity is valid no matter where you are on that identity journey, no matter what you're questioning, what you're still figuring out, the missing parts of the stories. Your identity is valid, and what you choose to do with it is just as valid. There is no one way to be Métis. Whether or not you know the stories, grew up in the culture, or carry a card, What matters is that you're doing your best to remember who you are, who your people are. And when and if you're ready, we're waiting here to welcome you back with open arms. I'd like to close today with another story about my mum-mums. It's one we tell often in our family, and it kind of just pops up in the weirdest places. Just everywhere we went when we were kids, she would always stop us and pause, and she would point out those bright yellow dandelions that would grow in the oddest places, and she would show gratitude for it. How amazing, she would say, that life can pop up in the middle of a crack on the cement, the middle of a highway barricade, or in the middle of a nosy neighbor's perfectly manicured lawn. It's beautiful that life can take root in such odd places. And maybe that's all I am. Maybe that's the overarching story of me and my relations. Maybe it's the easiest way to explain who we are. As a Métis woman, growing up proud of culture in an odd place, in an odd time, and in a country which has continually tried to deny the existence, resilience, and survival of her people for more generations than she can count, I think I find myself in the same boat as those dandelions. And how beautiful, how special, how amazing is that? We are alive and surviving and thriving in these oddest places. We are as tough as weeds. We are bright like those dandelions against the concrete in places that our ancestors never imagined. To quote Maria Campbell's famous biography, Half-Breed, I stand here today and I only want to say that this is what it was like, and this is what it's still like. My question for you is, what role are you playing in the stories that this generation of Métis people are living today? Marcy, thank you.